No, can you hear Ben? Not me.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good. Start by saying I can't answer Cheryl's question. I wasn't there at the right time of year. So, but I need to start this talk with my usual disclaimers and warnings. First, I don't know any Norwegian, so I'm probably going to mispronounce every name that I use, although I'm hoping that Oslo is Oslo. But then until last year, I thought I knew that Volvo was Volvo, but then I saw the ads and it's all different. Second, sadly, even though my purpose today is to get you to consider visiting Norway to walk, this talk has not been sponsored in any way by the Norwegian Tourist Board. And third, the ad for this talk said that I was going to be giving practical advice. Unfortunately, I've had to severely limit doing that for time reasons. So please feel free to ask me specific things in question time or afterwards. I also said in the ad I'd be talking about Kveldsmat. That's a meal time, like afternoon tea, but it's actually a late supper, something you have just before bedtime, but it's not really relevant to my talk at all. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them afterwards as well. The same applies. I was going to, vaguely relevant to my talk was the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway. If you have any questions about that, I'm not going to talk about that in this, but if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them, but have your tissues handy if you ask me about that. With that out of the way, I'll start. I was in Norway in 2019. It's the only time I've been to Norway. I was there for my usual reason. I had a conference in Oslo, so I grabbed LAN and we turned it into a 6-week European holiday. We're actually in Norway for 20 days in September, so that's the first month of autumn. And weather-wise, it's actually a good time to be in Norway. There weren't any extremes of weather when we were there. Before I get into the walking part of this talk,
Ben,
yep.
I'm sorry to do this to you, but can you confirm that this is the smaller set of photos?
No, that's the larger one, Chris.
The larger one. Okay, so I've got to find where we put the directory for the smaller set. I'm sorry, guys.
So, well, just imagine that there's a map of Norway. I think you all know where Norway is, sort of in relative to Sweden and Finland. It's a long country. You'd be aware of that. So it's actually 1,750 k's long. That's if you were going from Melbourne by air, that would get you to about halfway between Rockhampton and Mackay, sort of to put it in Australian terms. In terms of area, even though most of Norway is fairly thin, there's a fair bit of it. It's about 70% larger than Victoria. And this I still have trouble believing. It comes off the internet, so it must be true. Apparently, Norway has 239,000 registered islands, and it has 400,000 lakes. So I don't know how they fit all that in, but they somehow do.
Ben, I think I've got the photos up now.
Thank you. Yep.
Peter, can you tell me, are you seeing that photo?
Yep.
Okay,
Good. Okay, great. Thank you. Cool. What did I do then?
I think we'll go back to you yell next, Ben. Okay, you yell next, I'll go to the next photo.
Okay. But I did actually want to
I'll point things out.
but yeah.
Okay.
So
what I think
I won't touch
is
that.
if
Yeah,
you
yeah, I
finger
won't
on
touch
the
that.
top, it
Yeah.
zooms.
Right. There we go. Yep. I just wanted to point out too that up the top here, Norway has a border with Sweden. It has a border with Finland, and what might surprise you is it has a border with Russia. Just a short little bit over there, because it actually sort of arches all the way over. In terms of population, Norway has about 5.5 million people. So that's about 1.3 million less than Victoria. It's about 400,000 more than Melbourne. Country-wise, it's on a par with New Zealand, which is at about 5.3, and Scotland, which has about 5.4. So it's a relatively small place population-wise. You'd be aware that Oslo is the capital. Its metropolitan area has a population of about 1.5 million. Bergen is the second largest city, and that has a metropolitan population of about 470. So it's only about a third the size of Oslo. Those of you who are Joe Nesbo fans will know that there's a rivalry between Oslo and Bergen that is almost of Melbourne-Sydney proportions. But when you take account of the population, it's really a non-event. But anyway, my advice is to try and see them both. They're both very interesting places to visit, and you'll see some photos. In terms of history, although Norway has a long history, after Viking times, it's relatively uneventful compared with most other European countries, particularly countries such as Greece and Scotland, which I've spoken about previously. However, it's notable that for long periods, like Greece, it wasn't itself. It was actually controlled by Sweden or Denmark. It became fully independent in 1905, and that was achieved by peaceful means. So it wasn't the result of a war or anything. When it achieved independence, it had its own parliament, and that parliament decided that Norway should be a constitutional monarchy for whatever reason. As a Republican, I just can't fathom that, but they had a problem though. There was no Norwegian with any royal blood. It's been 600 years since they'd had a Norwegian king. So they looked around and took advantage of the fact that the European royal family is sort of like that. And they invited Prince Carl, who was the second son of the then Danish king, to become their king. Today, it's the same sort of thing as if you'd ask Prince Harry to become your king. It's one of his spares that's just floating around in Europe. Prince Carl had three things going for him. There was a blood relationship. If you looked back more than 600 years, he was related to Norwegian kings. Secondly, he didn't have Megan, but he had Maud. And Maud was even better because she was the youngest daughter of Edward VII of England, who you might remember was Queen Victoria's son, who had to wait forever to become king, a bit like a certain other king at the moment. And thirdly, he already had a 2-year-old son, because the problem is when you have royals, you always have to worry about sort of replacing them. So all going well, there wasn't going to be a problem there. So Prince Carl moved to Norway, and he named himself Håkon VII, and that was a name previously used by other Norwegian kings. As a matter of interest, he ruled until he died in 1957. He was then replaced by his son Olaf V, and he went until 1991, and then Olaf V was replaced by his son Harald V, and Harald V is still the king of Norway. So 119 years, 3 kings. So they were pretty prescient when they chose Prince Carl. Obviously had the right genes. So returning to my main purpose, I'll start by giving you a brief overview of my trip. We flew in, we had been in Stockholm, which is over there. We flew across to Bergen. We had a few days in Bergen. We then took a cruise that took us up here to the Lofoten Islands. We then flew down to Oslo. Lan left me in Oslo after we'd been there a few days. I then flew across to Stavanger, which was about there. Actually, I might just, so it's a bit more of a blow up. So there's Bergen over there, Oslo there, and Stavanger down here. I had 3 days in Stavanger. I flew back to Oslo. Then I had another 5 days still in Oslo. 2 of those were the conference. To give you some idea of distance, it's about 500 k's from Oslo by air to both Bergen and to Stavanger. That's about 30 k's more than Melbourne-Canberra, talking air distance. Most of the walks I did were either Bergen, Oslo, or Stavanger. And I'm afraid most of the walks were sort of Wednesday walk stuff, using that term in its least derogatory sense. I had one Sunday type walk. Kitty's just told me, actually, just go back to there. Kitty's just told me about 10 years ago, she did a whole lot of half day and day walks further up here. So if anyone's, I'm only going to be talking about walks down here. So if anyone's interested in walks up this way, see Kitty. So now, in terms of getting about in the southern, go back to that. In terms of getting about that southern area, there's pretty good coverage by trains and buses. You could consider hiring a car, but as you can see from the map, even in the southern area, you'd be doing a lot of mountain driving. So basically, Norway is just full of mountains.
Can I just stop for a minute?
With respect to trains, I had considered travelling from Oslo to Stavanger by train, but that was at least 8 hours each way. For a 3-day trip, that wasn't worthwhile. It's very easy to get around Norway by air. They have, most of their large towns have modern airports, and they've got a reasonable number of services.
Peter's put his hand up with a question. Have you, Peter?
No, it's just that none of us on Zoom can see any photos except tiny thumbnails.
Hang on, Peter.
Actually, I think it might be better if we wait till the end, Chris. Yeah,
We can hear you. We can't hear him.
yeah, I can't hear him, so yeah. I'm sorry, Peter, I can't hear you.
It's not a question.
So I should.
Oh.
Oh.
You can only see thumbnails, that's what he said. Not the photo.
What happened? What's
You
happened?
can only see thumbnails, not the photo. It's easy to see.
Oh, he's only got thumbnails.
Yeah, but maybe that's part of his present. Maybe it's the view he's looking at.
No, it might be. Have you made it available for them to see?
Well, I thought I was sharing the screen.
Yeah, but she can see.
The question we needed, Ben.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, while Chris is doing that, if I just keep going, I don't need photos for the next bit I'm talking about. I'd like to address the elephant in the room. It's one of the bits I put in the ad. Everyone knows Scandinavia is very expensive. So do you need to go and speak to your bank manager before you consider going to Norway? And my answer is, in a nutshell, no. If you can afford to travel around Australia, you can afford to travel around Norway. By world standards, Australia is an expensive country. It's up there with Switzerland and the Scandinavian countries. Now, I'm not saying that everything is the same price. Food is a bit more expensive over there, particularly if you eat out. But most other things are pretty much on par. With food, if you want to eat reindeer steaks every night, it's going to be very expensive. If you're happy to sort of just eat a bit more ordinary food, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. And in fact, some things are cheaper. If you like crisp breads for breakfast, and you should if you go to Norway, because that's one of their specialties, you can go to a supermarket. There's a massive range, and you can get a packet of crisp breads that will last you a week for $1. Compared with IKEA, where it costs you $6 or $7 to get Swedish crisp bread here. With respect to accommodation, my experience was you get more bang for your buck in Norway than you get here. And with respect to travel expenses, they're pretty much the same. With respect to air, there's one budget airline and there are two normal airlines. So there's a fair bit of competition in relation to flying. So that keeps the prices sort of down. Speaking of bucks, Norway is one of those nuisance European countries. It's not on the euro. It has the krona. However, during COVID times, Norway went almost entirely cashless. So at the moment, 2% of financial transactions in Norway are cash. That's the highest or the lowest rate of cashlessness in the world. The comparative figure you may have seen this week in Australia at the moment is 13%. So if you don't like converting currency, there's a pretty good chance that you can get by in Norway just on a credit card. As for the cost of getting there, it's pretty much the same as getting anywhere else in Europe that's not a major hub. A lot of airlines fly to Oslo from hubs in the Middle East and Asia. So getting there is not particularly difficult or expensive. That's so I finally got to the walking part of my talk. Has that been fixed or has?
Well, you're got the control.
Yeah, no, has it been fixed? So that the
Yes, it has.
oh yeah, yeah.
I think the
Okay.
green line around the outside shows what they can see.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, now that's not working out.
Oh, that's the trickier bit.
It's not moving, Chris.
Left and right.
Yep. So yeah, that's not.
Yeah, left and right isn't working.
Oh, here we go.
But there's a right arrow there
Okay.
and a left arrow over here
Okay.
and back. And click on it.
Yeah.
You happy with that?
They're very awkward. We used those before.
Now that I've armed it up.
Oh, yeah.
The
Okay.
keyboard's working.
Excellent,
but I've
yeah.
armed it.
Yep. Okay. We've just seen a couple of shots of Bergen. So I start talking about walking in Bergen. Bergen has there's a port area right next to its CBD. This is a shop there. It's Bergen has very nice parks. I should say we arrived in mid-afternoon and it was raining. So according to the guidebooks, that's Bergen's normal weather. But then we all know that the guidebooks have all been written by people in Oslo, so they would say that. Yeah. Oh, okay. Then I was very lucky then when I was there. Kitty has just said that they apparently get rain on 320 days of the year, as she was told. And fortunately, the rain has stopped when we wanted to wander around after we settled in. So we walk around the docks area. As you walk around, there are colourful houses all over the place. There's some very nice parks in Bergen. There's a fair bit of street art and there's a fair bit of public art. So, but actually that description applies to all of the Norwegian towns and cities that we went to. So I wanted to, this is another shot in that docks area. And I wanted to, the main reason I had this photo is just the main talk, or the only talk I'm going to be talking about is to get up to that point there. It's a place called Fløyen. And it has sort of nice lookouts. It's possible to get there by funicular, which is that sort of little white track you see there, but it's much nicer to actually walk there. It's if you ever see a photo of Bergen, you'll see some variation of that photo. It's not a particularly good photo, I'm sorry, but you see those particular warehouses and shops in that part of the dock area. It's that was just a bit of public art. I just included that so you can see the love affair Norwegians have with fish. The next day we had bright sunshine, so we headed off for a decent walk. This walk, you first have to start walking up some fairly steep urban streets, and a little bit further up, it's sort of got a bit steeper. And in fact, curiously, the steepest part of this walk are in this urban area. Once you hit the forest, the paths sort of flatten out a bit and they go left and right a bit more. And that's just an indication there of they can be really flat. Very nice forest you go through. As you walk along, you start getting very nice views. And some of you might recognise that that person there isn't a local. And you eventually come to this. And sorry, it's a bad photo, but I've chosen it because I could point out three things. The lookouts are here. There's two levels of lookout. There's a restaurant in these buildings here, and there's a really great ice cream shop just there. And it's almost worth going up for the ice cream. Sort of view you get from lookout, and this is looking back to the Bergen CBD. The CBD is in this area around here. The docks area where I showed you those photos, that's there. And I'm going to mention the cruise ship in a moment that takes off from about here. Okay. If you keep walking west from Floyan, you soon come across a lake. I wasn't expecting to see a lake sort of up on top of the hill, but then now that I know how many lakes there are in Norway, they've got to put them somewhere. So it was obvious on the tracks and the signs on the tracks around this lake that there are lots of walking tracks out into the forest from here. So you can easily extend your walk and make it a bit more of a bushwalk. Right, so then on our last day in Bergen, towards the end of the day, we hopped on this boat. You can see it's a Hurtigruten boat. For those of you who are not aware how this operates, every day from Bergen, literally every day, they send out one of these boats from Bergen and they go north up the coast. And they take 6 days to get up to near the Russian border. And they're there for a short while, they turn around, and then they take 6 days to come back to Bergen. And then the next day, the whole thing starts again for each ship. On the way up, they stop at 34 ports. On the way back, they stop at 33. This is actually the main way that a lot of the locals travel between the ports. Back in the old days, there weren't any roads up in the upper area, so boat was the only way you could get between the various ports. The ships also carry freight. It's actually part of a government subsidised service. And in one form or another, this service has been going for about 130 years. But I mean, as a tourist, it's a very useful thing to know about if you're wanting to go sort of up north. As a tourist, you can take a trip for as little as sort of one port to the next, or you can take the entire 12-day trip. That's or any sort of thing in between. Some of the stops are very short; they're in like 20 minutes. Others are at the bigger towns; they are longer, up to 4 or 5 hours. So it's worthwhile getting out and about. In our 3 days, we had a walk around 5 different towns. That's and then just a couple of shots. Sorry, this is the boat from the other side. This boat is actually, there are 11 boats that do this trip. This is the largest of them. And I discovered on the internet, it actually changed its name 2 years ago, and it's now called the Maud. We know why. I know why what it's been named after, but I don't know why they changed the name. It's just after you leave Bergen, it sort of looks a bit like that. The first place we stopped, it was the only place we stopped where we didn't actually dock. Here they had to take us by boat to and from land. We had half an hour of pretty intense rain just after we got to this place called Urke, but it makes for decent sort of river shots if you get a bit of rain. And walking back to the boat, there's just I thought, interesting sort of Norwegian country house. And then a little bit further on is Trondheim, which is the 4th largest city in Norway. And you can see that umbrella thing seems to be all over the world now. And just after you leave Trondheim, it's probably the most famous lighthouse in Norway. Go past that. And then on the morning of the last day of our cruise, we crossed the Arctic Circle, and sorry, we just another couple of cruise shots here, and that, and then yeah, crossing the Arctic Circle, it means that King Neptune has to make an appearance, and that means that at least one person gets a bucket of ice poured over them, and then kept going. And this was just before we got off the boat. And we got off the boat at this little place called Sovola, which is on one of these Lofoten Islands. These islands are sort of fairly well known for being very beautiful. And that's a shot sort of at the port there at Sovola where we got off. So if you do have a chance to walk around any of these islands, I'd advise you do it. We didn't actually have time for that, but it's very beautiful. So there's also an airport at Silva. It's only a small one, so the biggest plane it can take is probably to hold 10 or 12 people. And that took us down to Bodo, which is the next largest place down from here. And then we swapped planes there and finished up in Oslo. Now I'll show you some walks around Oslo. Start with these two. Now that looks as if we're a bit out of Oslo, but in fact, this is from these photos, you can see this is the same river. This river is actually, as if in Melbourne terms, this was the running through East Melbourne. It's that close to the CBD. If that creek down through the Fitzroy Gardens was a bit put on steroids, you get something like this. It's and then towards the end, it sort of tames down a bit. So just to give you a rough idea with Oslo, the airport is about the same distance out from central Oslo as Tullamarine is from central Melbourne. But unlike Melbourne, there is actually a good train connection between the airport and Oslo. And if you take that train connection, you finish up at the Central Railway Station, which is here. The Oslo CBD is basically all this area sort of in front up to there. The river I was showing you, it actually runs over here on the right-hand side. The tamer bits are down where it's straight and the wilder bits are along there. And you can see it actually runs underneath the main railway station to get into the bay. Then this is a larger scale version of Oslo, just to railway stations again there. I'm going to talk about 3 walks. One is way off the map up the top here, left. The second one is actually this park here. And the third one is a park down right here in the bottom right. So I should say too, this whole area is walkable. I stayed sort of in a couple of spaces here and had no problem sort of walking all around here. But there is a very good public transport system in Oslo. That's probably their public transport map. The thicker orange lines are train lines. The red lines are bus lines. The blue lines are tram lines. And the purple lines here are ferries. When you come out of the Central Railway Station, you will be greeted with that. And I don't know why, but you can see that, well, I can see that that is not a local, because if that was a local, he would be taking his clothes off and he'd be doing that. This is that. So.
Something's happening.
Yep. So that, I'll just keep talking and hopefully.
No, nothing's going to happen unless I get some keyboard and mouse.
Yeah, no, you're welcome to. I'll keep talking though while you're fiddling. So that strange structure up there is a ski jump, and where it is the site of the aerial skiing competition that Oslo hosted for the Winter Olympics in 1952. One of the reasons I sort of, well, a few reasons. One is that it's a whole lot of skiing activity takes place in that area where the ski jump is. It's so when there's no snow, there's a lot of cross-country skiing goes on up there. So when there's no snow, there's lots of walking trails up there. But just the actual, yep, here we go. Structures worth looking at. That building there is a museum. It has all things related to skiing. And the actual ski jump itself is not what they used in 1952. It's actually been rebuilt and replaced a few times. The building there at the moment, or that jump at the moment, was built in 2009. It's this is Norway's #1 tourist attraction, apparently. 1 million visitors a year go to it. It's the seating around it has a capacity for 70,000 apparently. So in the season, lots of people go there just to actually watch events there. It's yeah, as you can sort of see, those are stairs there. So if you're in Norway and you're missing the 1,000 steps here in Melbourne, just go here and walk up and down those a few times and you'll be right. So, and it's sort of a bit more of a close-up of the stairs and the seats. So now, if you take the train up there and you come back and you get off a few stops before the central station, you can easily get to this park that I'm about to talk about. It's called Frogner Park. It's a sculpture park, and it has 212 sculptures by Norway's premier sculptor, a chap called Gustav Vigeland. He lived from 1869 to 1943, and all of the sculptures in the park are by him. At the entrances to the park, there are sort of wrought iron gates like this, but otherwise all the sculptures are either granite or bronze. Unfortunately, there's a bad photo, and it's trying to give you some idea as to the size of the park. It's 80 acres, so it is a very large park. If you sort of note the distance between that monument and this one, which is, it's actually foreshortened in the photo, but there's another monument like that if we keep going this way. And then if you go the other way, if you go about the same distance, you come to a fountain, which I'll show you in a moment. And if you go the same distance again, you come to a bridge. And then you go the same distance again and a little bit more, you come to the main entrance. So it is very large. The monument in the middle is its central feature. There are 121 people represented in that monument. It's called the monolith. And it's called that because apparently it started off life as a single block of granite. At the base of the monolith, there are a whole lot of statues. I might mention of the 212 statues, they are all of naked people. And that's a sort of close-up of the monolith. And then at the base, you get statues like this. They're slightly larger than life size. So some are fairly sedate poses, and then some are a bit more energetic. It's, then if you keep going further down, this is the fountain. The statues are bronze, and this fountain is surrounded by statues like that. Then keep going, there's a bit of a garden. Keep going further, and then there's a bridge. On this bridge, there are 58 statues. Again, some of them fairly sedate, and some a bit more energetic, and then some very energetic. Now, these were all done in the late 1920s, 1930s. So if you were around back in those days, you had a choice. Do I get a gym membership, or do I marry a Norwegian? It's, and it's also as if Vigeland sort of discovered some sort of unknown Viking Kama Sutra. And if the tourist shops are any guide, the most famous of all the 212 statues is this one. And it won't surprise you to learn that it's known as Angry Boy. And you'll see representations of that wherever you go in Oslo, much as you see representations of mannequin piss when you go wherever you go in Brussels. So if you have a closer look, in common with a lot of the famous bronze statues in Europe, the bits that tourists like to touch are bright and shiny. So yeah, you can see that they like to touch his left hand, but then they also seem to be like to touch another part of his anatomy. And I'm not sure what that says about the tourists of Oslo, but so back to the map. So that was up there. And I might just mention the Royal Palace is here, and there's all this nice green around it. The park at the back is well worth a visit. It has sort of a few interesting things. And now we're going to another sculpture park, which is down here. It's a nice walk to get there, but you can also go there by tram. This park has got sculptures by a whole variety of sculptors, many sort of world famous around the world. There's Renoir's, there's a Rodin, some old, some new. This one was done in 2012. I've put this one here because this one is made of bronze, which sort of surprised me. So it's amazing what you can do with bronze in terms of colouring those. And it's, probably 80, 90% of the statues are of naked women as well. This is fairly high up in the a hill. You get some nice views back of Oslo at various points. The statues are in a forest area, so it's a very nice area to walk around. That's Marilyn Monroe, or the sculpture is called Marilyn Monroe. That one I included just to show that not all of the statues in Oslo are of naked women. That's yep. Sorry.
You don't know what she's wearing, that's right.
Oh, good point. And that's just a shot of some of the forest around there. If you walk back, you'll come across this building. It was still under construction when I went past. It's the new Edvard Munch Museum. It's Edvard Munch is Norway's most famous painter of the Scream fame. He had another museum that I visited that had his works, and now they're all being moved to here, which it should be open by now. And if you go a little bit further on, you come to the Opera House. It's quite an interesting modern thing. You can walk up onto the top of the roof there. You just walk all the way up there, and then you walk all the way up there. Just had this as a marker, but also sort of, you'll find trolls all over Norway, even if you don't go on the internet, but particularly if you go into tourist shops. Now, the final walk I'm going to mention today is Africa has its big 5 game animals. Norway has its big 3 walks. Next 5 photos I took from the internet. They're not my photos. The first of the big 3 is this one, Preikestolen. In English, usually referred to as Pulpit Rock. The second one is Trolltunga, which translates as troll's tongue for obvious reasons. And the third one is Courage Bolton. This is actually probably a better view. You can see the rock there. Okay. All 3 of these are in Western Norway. Trolltunga is a 3-hour bus ride to the east of Bergen, and the other 2 are to the east of Stavanger. One of them, this is another shot of Pulpit Rock from the other side. This is apparently the most popular tourist walk in Norway. The reason for that is it's pretty easy to get to. It's only a 2-hour walk from the car park to get there. As with me, you don't have to do much research to actually work out how to get there. With the other 2, you're looking at a 4 to 6 hour walk apparently, and that's for the one-way trip. In the case of Courage Bolton, it's only a 10K walk, but apparently you go up and down 3 small mountains, and that's considered to be the easier of the 2 walks. So no prizes for guessing which of these I did. I think I just mentioned it anyway. So yeah, if you want to do either of the other 2, you definitely need to do your research. It's and for instance, I read that it's not possible if you're using public transport to get to the starting point of either of those 2 walks and then have enough time to do the walk on that day. There's not enough time left for safety. Returning to the walk I did, you first have to get yourself to Stavanger. Stavanger is Norway's 3rd largest city. It's a port city, and it's the main base for Norway's oil industry, both with respect to its port and also with respect to its airport. So in the port, you sort of see all sorts of strange ships used for the oil industry. You'll also see these sort of ships in Bergen. Bergen also services the oil rigs. It has between the CBD and the port area, there's this play park. Basically, they've got all sorts of equipment that's no longer used on the oil rigs. They've just put them in this one spot, and kids can now play on them. That Christmas tree apparently had the very first oil that was pumped in Norway pumped through it, and that's back in 1969. Next to this play park, there's a museum that has everything to do with the oil industry. It has these details, models of all of the different rigs that were used. You can see they're quite complex, and there's quite a few other things. And this is where you'll find the history of the Sovereign Wealth Fund that I'm not going to talk about unless I'm asked. It's a, oh, and I just had to include one bit of street art. This is one bit of street art I came across in Stavanger. And I just mentioned Stavanger also has a great lolly shop. Probably has the biggest range of any lolly shop I've come across anywhere in the world. It's not as big as the High Point shop, but it's got a better range. That's Microsoft, you can see how it's spelt. It's the actual rock is 604 meters above sea level, but if you do the walk, you start 270 above. So that's 334 difference, but then you can see there's a few down, so that adds another 130. So you finish up with 460 meters of climbing, which coincidentally is how much climbing you'll be doing on Sunday if you go on Brett's Walk, like doing 475 on Brett's Walk. So I thought that was an interesting coincidence. So actually, to get to the car park, you take a ferry from Stavanger to a spot where you get the bus. The ferry is about a 45-minute trip. Bus is a 15, 20-minute trip. And then you get the car park and then the walk. The actual walk is 4.4 Ks each way. It's you start with a bit of a climb, and when you get to the top of that first climb, you look back where you've come and you get that sort of a view. And then you walk a bit further and you get that sort of a view. And then that's indication, some of the parts of this horrible rock sort of stuff, which are not very pleasant to walk on. That's most of the climbs are actually predominantly stair climbs, but you can see they're with rocks, so they're very uneven, and some of the stairs are quite high. So, at the end of the second climb, if you look back towards Stavanger, you get that sort of a view. Then you start going down again. And then you hit this flat area where there's the boardwalk. I imagine there'd be times in the year when it'd be very soggy, which is why they have the boardwalk there. Then you come to that's the biggest climb of the walk. You can see I wasn't the only person doing the walk on this day. And then when you get to the top of that big climb, you come to a flat area where there are a couple of lakes. So that's looking to the right. That's looking to the left. And you'll see there's a bit of a selfie here. I think it was inadvertent. Then a bit further on, you get that sort of a view. And then you come to the final climb. Fortunately, you don't have to go straight up there. The climb sort of takes you right across there. And then it's pretty flat sort of going, you have to go back that way, but it's pretty flat. So when you get to the turning point, you get that sort of a view. And then let's go on to the sort of flat area. I've also included that photo because you can see this young lass here. Most of the people, I think, on the day that I walked would have been locals, and a lot of them had their kids with them. And the kids just seemed to merrily trip up and down these stairs without any problems. So I was quite amazed. As you're getting closer, you can actually see the rock there already. And we're getting pretty close now. Closer still. And then we've actually got onto the rock. It's a great place for lunch. And my final photo, this wasn't taken with my camera. I was halfway back, walking back, when I was stopped by this young couple who turned out to be Spanish. And they said that they, for whatever reason, they'd taken a photo of me and did I want a copy? And so gave them my email address, and a couple of days later, they gave me that. So, in conclusion, my intention today has been to give you a taste of what is possible. Even basic internet research will show you that there's a lot more that you can do if you get yourself over to Norway. Given all of the fjords and the mountains and the islands and the lakes, wherever you go, it's going to be beautiful. And as I've sort of indicated before, the Norwegians are very keen walkers, so you'll find walking tracks, I think, right through the country. Therefore, I hope that should you ever head to Europe, you might consider including Norway in your itinerary. Thank you. Yeah, most of the time, the question was, what was the temperature like? Most of the time it was sort of pretty mild, so it would have been mid-teens, maybe a little bit more. Some of the nicer days it might have hit 20. Might have had a couple of days where it might have been 12, 13. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good time to go. So that was September, the first month of autumn. Yep. So,
Do you get midges in Norway?
I'm sorry?
Is there a time not to go when you might get midges?
When you might get
Midges, things that
midges.
bite you.
Sorry, I mean, I presume in summer that you would get them in lots of places. Stephen, are you able to? Yeah, like I say, we certainly didn't see any in September. So if you don't like midges, go in September. Oh, sure.
Then I'm going to ask the.
Hang on.
What's that?
Who's going to ask what?
The Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Yes.
Crazy.
Yep. So Norway has been extracting oil from the North Sea since I mentioned 1969. They had a sensible government that basically from the word go imposed royalties on the oil companies, and most of that royalty was put into the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So it's a fund that the government can only take 3% out of per year. I think the formal name of the fund is the National Pension Fund or something. So they've been doing that for a long time. I was quite amazed. They have a tax on the oil companies just for extracting the oil of 56%. And on top of that goes the corporate tax rate of 22%. So they are paying 78% tax. So that Sovereign Wealth Fund is the largest one in the world now. And as of a few weeks ago when I checked, its value was $1.5 trillion US. So they reckon that will do them for a good 200 years or so. So you might remember back when they were talking about this sort of excess profits tax back in 2008 or so in the Rudd years, the oil companies were screaming, oh, 1 or 2% extra is it's not going to make it, we're not going to be able to survive. You can say Norway has been imposing that tax since the mid-90s at that level. And I'm not too sure how these two figures compare, but I saw another thing on the internet that was saying that we in Australia get about 7% of the value of oil. This was 2020. We were getting 7% of the value of oil revenues from oil companies. The equivalent figure in Norway was 36%. And I mean, that's just, Norway basically just has oil. We have iron ore and we have all sorts of metals, oil, and we have gas. So yeah. I don't think we've been well served by our politicians.
No.
The electricity is generated mainly by hydro because
Yep.
all that water you can see is going down. So it's very cheap and clean. So you don't have any pollution, not from Norway itself. You get it from the other places.
Yeah.
No, so
We've got a very high rate of electric vehicle use.
I believe so. Yes.
Now, you mentioned one of the kings was an Olaf. I don't know if you know about Saint Olaf. Saint Olaf is the patron saint of parking.
Ah,
So
okay.
you've just got to make sure that you say a little incantation before you look for a parking space, and Saint Olaf will come to your assistance.
Yeah.
anybody online got a question?
Oh, yes. Anyone online got a question? We'll work out how you're going to give it to us. Jeff and Sue are shaking heads. Deborah's thumbs up and nothing to say, nothing to say.
Actually, I'm very
Okay.
impressed. This is working quite well.
What? Oh,
Our,
pardon?
our question was already answered.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Yeah.
Ah, Bernadette does have a question. Bernadette, I've got some sort of captioning going on. So let's see if we can hear read your question on the screen.
No, I haven't written it.
That's okay. You don't need to, Bernadette. It's actually writing up.
Speak it. The captioning will happen from your voice.
Oh, okay. Oslo is the home of
Yeah.
Is that right? Can they hear me?
No,
No,
Bernadette,
no.
that didn't work. Would you like
No.
to type it and I'll grab a hold of some keyboards and see on the chat system?
Okay, let me have a look.
Yeah, we
Okay.
missed the middle part of that question, Bernadette.
Why is Oslo the home of Nobel?
Yes.
Why is of the Nobel Peace Prize? Oh, I used to know the answer to that. Sorry. But I don't know. Sorry. There is obviously a reason, but and I used to know it, but I don't know what it is now.
Isn't Nobel Prize that is given by a millionaire who made his money out of
Yeah,
dynamite?
but the thing is that most of the Nobel Prizes are awarded out of Sweden from Stockholm. And the Peace Prize is the only one which is
right,
out of Oslo
right.
in Norway. And I think that's Bernadette's question as to why there's that difference. But and there is an explanation, but I can't remember what it is. Oh, okay.
TNT.
Peter tells me Alfred was Norwegian.
Yeah, but it doesn't explain.
But then
why
why
the
aren't
rest
all
went
of them out
Sweden.
of Oslo?
Yeah.
That's the question.
What is the favorite food?
What's the favourite food in Norway? Surely. What was it? Pizza.
Probably is.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually looked at that up and I was surprised by the answer because when you're there, you think it's meatballs because you see meatballs all over the place. But it's not. It's yeah, no, it was I've sorry, I've forgotten, but it surprised me because you don't see it all that much around, but apparently it is their favorite food.
It's not bacalao, the salted cod.
Yes,
No, I don't think so. No,
we'll stipulate
No,
that
I
last
don't think it was a
would be
fish,
awarded
actually.
in his notice when
it's
to award the most fish
Yeah.
of them all. Norway was still in its uneasy union with the Nobel.
I think we're falling
died.
apart.
Some suggested Nobel wanted to give
You're the boss.
some suggested
Okay.
to give some support.
Have we finished? Anybody got any more questions? Okay. Robin has. Robin.
Do they have an army?
Yes,
Does Sweden have an army?
yes.
Has there ever been a war between them?
If you go back, I think there might have been.
That's good enough.
Yeah, or else. I mean, Sweden is quite a bit larger than Norway in terms of population, and I think it always has been. It's at least double. I mean, in fact, it's more like triple the population. So I think Norway's probably been fairly sensible in realizing that there hasn't been much point in fighting Sweden. but I think there have been some clashes over the years, but I mean, it goes back, you have to go back a few hundred years, so, yeah. And I mean, the Swedes were quite aggressive back sort of 300-400 years ago. Yeah.
You got a question?
So Ben, just as a matter of point of interest, my parents were refugees from the Holocaust, and they went, they found themselves in Oslo because after World War II, when they were in a refugee camp, the ambassador from Norway rocked up one day and said, "We lost 600 Jews in the war. We want to replace them." And so they ended up in Oslo for 2 years. And after 2 years, my father discovered that little border that Norway had with Russia. And that was it. They were on their way to Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. There are actually a couple of moving memorials in Oslo. There's one area where they have plaques of the people that were Jews that were taken from houses in Oslo and sent to the Holocaust. And yeah, if you go through that area, it's quite moving. There is actually also a Holocaust memorial in Oslo as well. So, yeah.
Okay, I want to thank Ben very much for this presentation. It's been really interesting for me, at least, to learn all these things about Norway that I didn't know and didn't even think that might be possible. Certainly some interesting walks and places to see. So thank you very much, Ben.
And for the comments there that you might want